Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today, Lamastachtas Bava Batra daf Pei Daled. We are going to begin on Pei Gimel Amud Beis, in the middle of the Mishnah by the two dots. Arba midos b'moicher. There's actually four different halachos that it comes to the category of a sale. First of all, machal chitin yalfois v'nim sarois. Let's say the arrangement was to sell this person high quality wheat, and it turns out that when the buyer got his hands on it was inferior wheat. So then so the din is that the buyer is able to retract, because obviously he didn't want inferior quality grain. He was expecting it to be of higher quality, and therefore the fact you gave him lower quality, he can back down. The other way around, it was supposed to be lower quality wheat, and for some reason he ended up giving him high quality wheat. The seller can say, well, in a second, I didn't mean to maybe give you the higher quality of wheat, and therefore I want to retract. So this is a little bit logical, that if it turns out as they were planning to be, then that's it. So if it was good, and it turns out to be exactly as you were expecting, or it was bad, but that's what you said it was going to be, so then there's no mekaftos. On the contrary, this is exactly what was expected, and therefore neither of them can retract. And then the last part of the Mishnah says, shechamtis v'nimsa levana v'nimsa shechamtis. Rashbam says shechamtis is a duma, that based on like the sun, which is the damdum nichama. So let's say you were expecting to have red wheat, and it turns out to be white wheat, or vice versa. So in that case, says the Mishnah, that since it is a different min entirely, the din is, and then it gives other examples. Let's say, for example, eitzim shel zayis nimsa shikma shel shikma nimsa shel zayis. Even though maybe sycamore tree may be of higher quality than an olive tree, or vice versa, or v'nimsa or yain v'nimsa chayim chametz v'nimsa yain, and what you would think wine is higher quality than vinegar. Nonetheless, we say that they can retract over here. And the Rashbam explains, v'nimsa salvana shneim toy. In that case, it's considered like a mistake on both sides. The kivan because the condition was to have this red wheat. He obviously is interested in holding on to the white. He doesn't want the white, because that's what he was expecting. That was the arrangement. Everything else in the Mishnah, and here's the key line of the Rashbam, shnei minim. These are two separate items. Even let's say they're in the same quality, doesn't make any difference. One may prefer one item over the other item, and therefore for that reason they can both retract. Okay, fine. Let's continue. So, question 1 says like this: Yain v'chaymitz min echadhu, Rabbi Omer shnei minim. This really sounds more like not what we just saw. So, we don't actually have, according to the Mishnah, it sounds like yain and chaymitz are two separate minim. Rabbi Omer shnei minim v'inin ma pligi. It's mostly in the Rashbam, this din. So one is, again, okay, we didn't even do either of them. It says tar mizeh el zeh im truma sa truma. So the question, is there a din truma regarding these things? I don't see the Rashbam on this at all. Okay, and secondly is im chayev shvua betani yain v'chaymitz v'hayde be'echad mehen. So we know if a person might have mixed us, you would let's say you say that I owe you wheat but not barley. So in that situation, is that these are considered like two separate minim, and it's considered to be not an acceptable din when it comes to shvua of moed mixas, because it has to be mimina taina. So is this considered mimina taina? Okay. I don't see this in the Rashbam over here. Let's just quickly scan this part of the Rashbam, which I didn't see. Okay. All right, so let's continue. Says the Gemara. Amar Rav Chisda, Machalo Shava Chamesh B'Sheish. Let's say a person sells, and this is in the Maseres Shas. It tells us this is found in. Why can't I find it over here? And why is it Maseres Shas? I'm not sure why I can't find it. Okay. Anyway. It's only in the halacha. I'm not sure where it is. Sounds like in the Zahav. Anyway, machar loy shava chamesh b'sheish. Let's say a person sells something which is worth 5, but for 6, so it ends up being more than it was really worth. B'hooker, and then the price went up. V'amad al shmeina, and it went up to 8. So minis ana. Ministana, loikeach yachal v'loy moicher. Do we say that the loikeach, the buyer, can retract, v'loy moicher, but not the seller? Yishum diarmele, because you could say, we'll look at the Rashbam in a second. Iwalo o nisan, if you didn't have the buyer can say to the seller, even though again it was really worth only 5, but if you didn't overcharge me, lo havi motzes hadresbach, then you couldn't back out. Hash did yonisan, but now that you did, or if you didn't overcharge me, but now that you did overcharge me, motzes hadresbach, now you're able to back out? No, it doesn't make any sense. The fact is, it was really only worth 5, and then, but you sold it for 6, so you were trying to trick me. But it ends up afterwards going up in value to 8. So, in the event where you would have done the right thing and given it to me for 5, you wouldn't have been able to retract. But in the case where you did trick me and sell me something which is actually worth less than it was what you sold it for, and then it went up, so of course not. So according to this logic, we're saying that no, the din is that only the loikeach is yachal asabai and not the moicher. Let's look at the Rashbam. So the Rashbam says, and we'll just in fact, the Rashbam, it is in Perka Zahav. So it says, Mi shehuto olav yadu al yoina. Ketzad, machul shavahei bevav. Let's say a person sold something which is worth 5 for 6. Minis ana. Loikeach, so he said the buyer is the one who gets hurt because the buyer is buying something for 6 when it's really worth only 5. So the buyer is the one who's getting taken advantage of. Yad lokeach al yoina. So he has the upper hand. Therefore, Ratza Oimer Lo Tainli Moisa, he can say, give me the difference, because it was really only 5, so you should give me the difference between the 5 and 6. Oh, Tainli Ma, give me my money back. Oh, Tainli Ma Shione Sani, give me the difference. Marchlo Shabava Behe, let's say he sold something which was worth 6 and for a lower price, Nisana Moicher. So in this case, the seller is the trickster, if you will. So you had Nisana Moicher. So the seller ended up getting, the one who got the lower end of the deal, because he ended up losing out. It was really worth 6, and he only got 5 for it. So Moicher al Yoina. Ratza Oimer Lo Tainli Mekhi. He can either say, give me my Mekach, or again, or the difference. Umihu Leisel Chazak Rav Chisda. However, the halach is not like Rav Chisda. Ela Karava. The pasuk Hasam Hilchas Ashtus Kaino Maxorina. He just paskins that when it comes to a 6, if it's one more than a 6, it is a kinyan, but you have to give that difference. Now, if you skip down to a few more lines, so that if you'll be yosim ishtos, that be bitul mekach. If it's more than a 6, it's a bitul mekach. Ratza moichel laxer, and the seller could retract at mishum de adayin l'skayim hamekach hagamri. The mekach hasn't completely been completed. Kozman shechol lekech laxer, when he can retract. The adayin lo hero latager o lakroima. We say that when is it over? Like when is he moichel? When he had enough time to be able to show it to some expert. During this time, this ane gamhu, So both of them ended up losing out. First of all, the seller selling something which was really only worth 5 or 6, so the buyer lost out, but now it went up to 8. Now the seller loses out. In this situation, we don't allow the meicher to retract. The mihu shenisana mikar b'shas b'chira loikeach. We look at who is the one who is really the one who was tricked at the time of the sale. Only the loikeach, and therefore only the loikeach can change his mind, but not the meicher. That's the idea. So look at this top Rashbam Pei Dalid. Ilav do'inisan b'shas b'chira. If you didn't trick me, would be a good deal. In fact, it went up. You have no ability to be able to retract, right? Because it was a fair sale. So now that you deceived me and you sold something which was only 5 for 6, so you ended up basically stealing from me in a certain regard. So of course you shouldn't be able to retract just because it went up. Vatana tuna. Vatan support like this. It says in our Mishnah, if it was a good deal and it turned out good wheat, that was what you're supposed to give, and you gave poor quality, so we say that in that case, only the buyer is able to retract because this person was given less than what he was supposed to get. It's just like over there when you were given the item, but it was the lekech that was hurt. So over here, the lekech was hurt, therefore the lekech can retract, but not the moicher. Okay, that's the idea. Let's say again, it was the opposite, that it was really worth 6, but he sold it for 5, so the seller was frauded. V'huzlu, then it went down, v'omdu al gimel, went way down, minasana, so moicher. So the one who was harmed was the moicher, the seller, because he ended up selling something which is really worth 6 for only 5. So therefore, moicher yachal achsaboy, the seller can retract. V'olekech, yermalei, because it said, ilu loya nisan, if you did not deceive me, loy have a matzis harisbach, so you the lekech couldn't have backed out. So hashta matzis harisbach, so now how could you back out? V'tanatuna, rois v'nim seyafos, in the event the opposite happened, that you originally wanted something of low quality, it turned out to be of high quality, so therefore you paid for, let's say, that which, let's say, was of a lower quality, and therefore you ended up giving something of higher quality. So who lost out? The moicher. So moicher yachalasaboy v'loikeach. Okay. So my kamashmon, I understand then. What is Rav Chisda adding? Masnisin ilchayra. All of this is derived straight from our Mishnah. We're just using our Mishnah as a proof. So obviously, it's the same thing. So what is he adding? So even masnisin, it was just from our Mishnah. Havamina dilma derav Chisda tevayu matzu hadrubahu. Maybe both of them could retract. Masnisin hasla inon. Our Mishnah is coming to tell you the leikech yachalasaboy. The pasuk says ra ra yomer hakoina, that you can say that I was saying it was bad, so it isn't a mekach tos. I always knew I was overpaying. Okay. Shchamtis v'nipsas lavana. So again, in that situation, since they're two separate minim, so the din is that both can retract. Amra papa mediktani lavana. The fact that it mentions that it was white, and then shemamina hay shimsha sumakti. It must be that this grain became red by the heating of the sun. This is how the wheat got heated up. Teda, and I'll prove it to you. To kasamka safro panya, because the sun is red in the morning and at night during sunset. The reason why we don't see it all day, it's just because of our vision. So therefore, it represents like the morning and the nighttime, representing the redness of the sun. So Meisvei, in the Gemara, it says in Vayikra, Umarehu amoik min ha'or. This is referring to the evaluating of the saras on the person's skin, that it is deeper from the actual flesh on the body. So Kamari Chama amuka min hatzel. And it says just like the sun, which is omuk from the shade, but also mlavanhu. And of course, if we're talking about saras, we're talking about the color white. And it talks about the sun. So how can we say red when we compare the sun? So my answer is kamari cham lo kamari cham. It's like the sun, but not like the sun. Kimar chama diamukum and sail. It's almuk from the shade. Over there it's white. But over here it's red. Why do we originally think that the sun is white? We know the sun's red. It's like, what's the chiddush? So Besafra the Chalfa Be Varde the Gan Eden. So basically in the morning it passes by the gate of Gan Eden. Bepanya the Chalfa Pischa the Gehenum. And at night it passes by the gate of Gehenum. Some say the other way around. Says the Rashbam. Nahirin Doloi Bari. Ma'or Einenu, our eyesight Enu Bar Kolkach, Mitoich Or Hayoim, Shimikah Einenu. The light weakens our eyes. Almoik, says the Rashbam, Halava near Almoik Eitzel HaShachar. Okay. So Bepanya, says the Rashbam, Shishaikas Bamarev, the Chalva Pizri Gehenim, Ademes Mikoich Eish Gehenim. Becomes red from the strength of the power of Gehenim. Some say it the other way around, that actually maybe it's the morning that is the koyach of Gehenim, and at night is the koyach of Gan Eden. Okay, obviously that's beyond the scope. What exactly is that referring to? So this is really question one. Our Mishnah must make the sheet of Rabbi and not like the Rabbanan. The sign is we continue to pay down my base. And this is pay Dalid Amid Beis. So Yain v'chayim min echadhu. Rabbi Yomi shnei minim. So we have this machlokus whether or not wine and vinegar are one or two minim. Our Mishnah seems to imply they're separate, and therefore it's like Rabbi says. What is this referring to? And this is the Rashbam we needed. The im tar mizel zeh trumas truma. If they're considered to be like one, so therefore you could take off truma one to the other. To karinin be bahari moisem imenu. You're taking truma from it. The chen inin hoidam amina taina, as you said, the im tainu yayin b'chaymitz. A person has Yomi wine, and vinegar. V'hoidalo be'achnehem. You say, I owe you wine. Chayv shvua al sheni. You have to make a shvua on the vinegar. The ika hoidam mixas a taina amina taina. It has to be the same type of species. Fine. So anyway, it's a machlokus. So a field tamer rabbanan adkan lo pigi rabbanan leha de Rabbi el inin meiser truma. Maybe the whole machlokus is regarding to truma. We're going to be law. Yom Rabbi law menayin l'tarim mineral yafes shitrumas truma. How do a person can take separate good from bad and it's still considered to be a good truma? Shnemer v'loy sisol of chait. A person should do a sin ba'arimchem eschel boy mimenu when a person separates its truma. Now imenu kadosh. If your actions mean nothing, so nesias chait lamos. So what's the sin? Elo must be mekan l'tarim mineral yafes shitrumas truma. It's a raya that taka. It is a good truma, and therefore says the Rashbam, it means when it's referring to the same min, right? So that's the whole chiddush. By trumas and meisers, it could be because one is of inferior quality, but nonetheless, even though yain b'chaymitz, maybe the reason why the Rabbanan say it's considered to be min echad is because only over there, when we're talking about trumas and meisers, we're lenient and we say that you can separate good from a good to a bad with min echad. In wine is like good and vinegar is not good, but maybe it's min echad. When it comes to a sale, the kol yam ikan nichalei b'chamra v'nichalei b'chala. There's some people that like wine, and some people don't like vinegar. Some people, for whatever reason, want vinegar; they want wine. So you can't look at it. Even if you would taka say that it's considered like one min, when it comes to mekach and memkar, it doesn't make any difference. The din should be that they should be able to retract, because if I walked into this deal expecting wine, that's what I should be getting, and therefore if it's vinegar or vice versa, then it won't be good. Okay, so again, question one is again yain b'chaymitz min echad hu Rabbi Yomer shnei minim leinin ma'pligi. So again, obviously one of them has to do with the case of our Mishnah. Is it considered to be one or two minim when it comes to a mekach? But again, when it comes to this, the machlokus is if you're tarim mizel zeh, whether it's a good truma, and also when it comes to the shmua moida mixas a taina, it has to be min a taina. Says the next. Let's go slow. Okay, we didn't do TA yet. TB. Okay, let's look at question TB9. Yain v'chaimitz min echad hu Rabbi Omer shnei minim le'ima pligi. So it's the same question. And we'll just mark this as pei daled mud beis. This is TB9. So what I write? Lahafresh truma echad al chavero. Okay. Le'inyan shvuas moedim amiksa sarach miminatayna. Okay. Weiter. Says next Mishnah. Says Mastis. Amoiche peres al chavero. A person sells fruits to his friend, and Rashbam says upasak loy damim, that they had a certain agreed upon price, bishar, based on the market price. Hayadua kol eifoy kach v'kach umashach. The Mishnah then says that you sold fruit at a set price, and mashach, and you did mashicha. Says Rashbam kugoyin besimta, because you mashicha and Rosh Hashanah won't work, but in the simta will. Or a courtyard which belongs to both of them. Kana v'yafal pi, says the Rashbam, shaloi modad, even though you didn't measure it. The medida lo ma'akva. Measuring is not ma'akev. The eno elo gili milsa ba'alma kama mochar. That's just a gili milsa, how much was sold. But imo pasak, that's only because you agreed upon a certain price. But if you didn't actually set a certain price, even if you even measured, even if you did mashicha, it doesn't work. In the event that you did not have an agreed price, no one is going to actually be samech das that it's going to be a sale. Because the seller could always just quadruple his price. So therefore, you don't actually, even though you do mashicha or anything, you're not samech das that it's a good sale. I only want to acquire expecting it at a lower price. So therefore, if we're dealing with a situation where it's not a pasuk or a dam in b'shar hayadua, so then in that situation, even if you did mashicha, it doesn't help. But over here, you did this. It says we agreed upon price, and mashicha was done, even though you didn't measure below madad kana. However, madad below mashach kana. If all you did was measure it, you didn't do mashicha yet, that doesn't work. You have to actually have done mashicha. Okay. But if this person is smart, soicher esmin kaiman. So all you can do is rent out that place, and then you're kaina that area. You're kaina through kinyan agav or kinyan chatzar. Soicher esmin kaiman. Halkeich pishtan mechaver. A person who purchases pishtan, like flax from his friend. Harizel kana. You don't own it ad shiatilunu mamakom mamakom, until you actually physically move it from one place to the next. And let's say this pishtan is still attached to the ground, the tolash kolshu, and even if you detached it in the smallest amount, kana, then it will be a kinyan. Okay. Says the Rashbam, avoikech pishtan dahainu shalifi zutri harizel loikana b'mashicha. You don't acquire an shiatalenu kolemer shiag v'yem. You have to actually physically lift it up. Okay. Says the Gemara, Rav Asi, Rav Yochanan, Madad v'haniach al gabi simta kana. So we said before that if it was a set price, even though you didn't do mashicha, but you were madad, it's not kaina. Rav Asi actually says over here that if you're madad, and the Rashbam says b'kelav shel moicher, that these items are in the seller's vessels. You're measuring it in the seller's vessels. V'niach al gabi simta, and you put this down, the loikeach, put it down in the simta. So kind of the loikeach is kind. Says Rashbam. How the loikeach is kind. Kilu hanicha meicher b'shusay shaloikeach. It's kilu that even though it's in the meicher's kalim, it's kilu like it was actually put on into the domain of the buyer. And again, it's talking about the case where money's already set aside how much it's going to be. V'simta is the oimer shvil shechidim. Some say it's referring to like this individual road. It's something that protrudes out of the public domain. It's a place where you can put down your items. Therefore, it's like a comparable to a courtyard which belongs to shutav. Okay. So again, Rabbi Yochanan says even once you're madad, but it was put into the simta, even though it's in the kelim of the meicher, it's the lekech's kainet. So Omerle Rab Zeil Rav Asi Shemul Shama Rabbi. Maybe he only heard this Ella b'moided l'teich kupasai. Maybe only if it was measured, if it was in his own kli, it was in the lekech's kli. So you're telling me maybe it was in the meicher's kli. Maybe it's only a good kinyan for the lekech when it was put down in the simta when it was in the lekech's kli. Armalei dami hamrabanan kadol gami in shishmaisa. Now it sounds like you haven't learned the sugya. Mother to kupasim memor boy. Why would you even need to be said? Right, it's obvious. Says Rashbam, Afil Bershus Moicher Kanile Kale de Lekeach. Even if it was in the Rishus of the seller, but it was in the Lekech's vessels, so it doesn't even have to be the simta. Even the Rishus of the Moicher, the Lekech would be kind if those items were in the Lekech's kalim. So it must be, if we're talking about a case of a simta, we're talking about it could work even though it was actually in the Moicher's kalim, because it was in the Lekech's kalim, obviously it would work. So kiblu minei or lo kiblu minei. This answer of Rab Zera from Rab Asi, did he accept it or not? Toshma. Yom Rav Yana Yom Rabbi Chatzar Shotvin, when it comes to this courtyard, kainin zemizeh, they're kaina one to the other. So we're going to end up seeing that he actually did accept this statement, because my lav al gabi karka, it must be that it was put onto the ground. So the answer is lo l'toich kupasai, it was put into his kli. Hachinam mistar b'yom Rav Yochanan Rav Yochanan madav aniach al gabi simta loikana. Elsewhere it says that even though you measured it, but it was put into the simta, it's not a kinyan. So kashna dadi elav shmamina kan b'moidin l'tukupasai kan b'moidin al gabi karka shmamina. It's totally if it was put onto the ground. So in that situation, that wouldn't work. However, if it was put into the kalim of the meicher, then we said in the simta it would work. Let's look at question 2. Kate said Tirtz b'Gemara stiras ma'amis Rabbi Yochanan de mechad oimer madad v'heniach gabi simta kana meidach oimer loy kana. So as we said, so is it kind or not? So if it was b'moidin l'tar kupasa was put into his kli, then is kaina. But it was just put onto the ground, then it would not be kaina. Okay. Okay. Good. All right. Weiter. Tashma. Madad v'lei mashach loy kana. So our Mishnah said that if you measure but you didn't do mashiach, it doesn't work. So my law is simta. Even though it's in a simta, so you would think, what do you mean if it's a simta? Even though it's in the rishus, even if it's in the kelim of the meicher, should work. Lo rishus rabbim. He isn't kaina with mashiach and the rishus rabbim, even in his own kli, right? So as we said, just to clarify, if it was in the rishus meicher, even, then it would be kind of, even though it's in the lekech's kli. In the rishus rabbim, no, it doesn't work. So Yahachim Eresha, it says Mashach lo madad kana. If you did Mashicha, it is a kinyan. Mashicha b'rishus rabbim mikana. Understand? You can't do Mashicha in a rishus rabbim. We saw this not too long ago. But by Rabbi Demer Tavayu, Masira kaina b'rishus rabbim. You have to do Masira. V'chatzer shener shel shneim. Mashicha kaina b'simta v'chatzer shehi shel shneim. If you want to be able to kaina with Mashicha, that's only in the simta. The hagbah kind of b'chol makom, and of course you can do hagbah anywhere. So my mashach nami the katani mishus harabim l'simta, and we had this before. When it means mashach, we had this before. It doesn't mean you just mishlicha in the rishus harabim, because that won't work. But if you're mashach from the rishus harabim into the simta, then that mashiach will work. Not because it was in the rishus harabim, and since you took it out and put it into the simta, that's what it means. So yihachem aseva. Im hayapikech saychasim kaiman, you're going to rent its place. Yirishus harabim. If the place is rishus harabim, b'man agar, we had this before. Who are you renting this from? You can't rent out a rishus harabim. Hachikamer. V'im rishus baalim he. If it was a rishus of the baal, then im hayapikech saychasim kaiman. Then that situation he could rent out the place. Okay. Okay. let's see. We're going to stop there. Maybe we have one question. Maybe question 8. Madad hamoicher v'haniach bekelev al gabi karka. It was put onto the ground. Ha'im kaina halokech. Halokech mi kaina. So in Rosh Hashanah we established you're not kaina. Besimta v'chein b'chatzar hashutvin plegi bigamara. Adkan.